Hello, Connor and Andrew.
Hey, Bob.
Hey, Bob, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. And I'm happy to be with you two. Again, it's just like old times. Let me introduce you. Well, first of all, let's start with all due respect. Let's start with me. I'm Robert Wright, publisher of the Nonzero newsletter. This is the Nonzero podcast. You guys used to be part of the Nonzero team. You've gone on to bigger and better things. So, Andrew Day, you are at the American Conservative. What's your title there?
I'm senior editor and I'm host of our weekly podcast, which is called TAC Right Now. TAC, TAC, the American Conservative.
Do you have guests on that?
We usually don't. I did this week. I talked to Jennifer Kavanaugh of Defense Priorities, who has become a friend of mine. She and I actually went to Ukraine together a couple months ago. So maybe we could talk about that on this show.
But enough about Jennifer.
Normally
the reason I ask is that you haven't invited me on. But
we normally don't. We just have staffers. But if you want to come on, we should.
Andrew, I am totally over it. I'm totally over it. Filial piety is dead.
I mean, we did do that non-zero tax synergy episode. That was fun.
Yeah,
we put that on our podcast.
Who orchestrated that, Andrew? Who initiated that? Look, I'm not bitter. It's fine. Connor, hello. Connor Echols is at Responsible Statecraft at the Quincy Institute, and you have a title too, right?
I do. It's simply reporter, not even senior. So, I feel a little inferior.
You should demand. You could get senior. You could get senior reporter.
Yeah, I'll fight for senior.
They cherish you. They value you. Yeah.
If Kelly's listening, if my editor's listening.
And somewhat confusingly, I am in Connor's office at the Quincy Institute physically now. But this is not normally my office.
And Connor is not. Connor's at home?
I'm at home indeed. Yeah, you're actually we might be getting, I don't know if this will be as interesting to listeners, but yeah, we've sent Andrew needed a spot to record, so we've actually got full synergy here in practice.
And I have to say, shout out to Pauline from Quincy for letting me up, because I was giving her terrible estimates of when I would arrive, because stupidly I was doing the maps on my phone and I was like, oh, it's only 8 minutes away. And then it was still only 8 minutes away. Like 5 minutes later, I realized it thought I was driving. So it took like 20 minutes rather than the 8 minutes I estimated. So thank you, Pauline, for waiting for me.
Well, if you need any tips about how to navigate the modern technological world, Andrew, I'm here to help your generation. So it's basically an end of the year review of American foreign policy, but it's only today's the December 18th, and this is going to post, I think, tonight. So we might as well start off with something that's current and will lead us naturally into a review of the year in Trump foreign policy. We're going to try to size that up. I think I'm going to press you in particular, Andrew, to find what coherence there is to be found in Trump's foreign policy, because I'm kind of a skeptic on that front. And of course, the American Conservative is MAGA-ish, but has not supported everything Trump has done, especially on the foreign stage by any means. And, Connor, for that matter, at the Quincy Institute, where Responsible Statecraft is, there are MAGA-ish sympathies. It's an ideologically diverse place, except for the unifying theme of restraint in foreign policy. So you may, who knows, you may spring in and defend Trump, even though I think you're less inclined by your own ideological orientation than Andrew to do that kind of thing. But we'll see. So last night, Trump gave some speech where Tucker Carlson had said he was going to declare war on Venezuela or something. He didn't.
Antiwar.com as well reported the same thing. Mm-hmm.
What did he do?
He gave a very bizarre speech. To me, it seemed like the teleprompter operator may have been going too fast or something. It felt like an infomercial. He was talking really fast. It was kind of a normal rant. And, although it would have been terrible, it would have been kind of funny if at the end of it he did announce a war on Venezuela, because otherwise it was kind of nothing, I mean, he clearly was trying to defend the administration's policy on affordability. After recent off-year elections, there's been a realization on the Republican side that the affordability issue is kind of killing the Republicans politically, and he was defending the administration's efforts on that front. I wouldn't be surprised if there was some sort of campaign of deception to make people think he was going to announce a war on Venezuela, just to get people watching this address. Once I realized it was from the diplomatic reception room rather than the Oval Office, that kind of reduced the odds they were going to announce war in Venezuela, in my view. But He did not announce war, but, you know, we've already blockaded, or he announced a blockade previously, which is an active war. So
it is. So it's a blockade on all oil leaving Venezuela. Is that it?
I mean, you kind of have to do like an exegesis of his Truth Social post. I think that's the only evidence we have, but that's what it would suggest.
Connor, is that your take?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely that, at least. And we're just seeing, I mean, there's so many opportunities for escalation that are now presenting themselves. You almost have to wonder if there's a, you know, I don't know where this instinct is coming from, but if there's an almost desire to try to get Maduro to do something stupid and to get things going. Because you've got not only that, but you've got a bunch of planes, American military planes and other things flying around with their transponders off. There's been near misses with civilian aircraft. There's all kinds of opportunities for escalation. And it really does just feel like sort of putting your finger out there and seeing what happens.
Yeah, the Maduro government has ordered Navy ships to escort these commercial ships that are supposedly under blockade. So you can imagine an escalation pathway there easily.
You can. It's a little hard to imagine Venezuelan naval boats firing on American boats that were seizing a tanker, but you never know. I mean, like if I were the captain on that Venezuelan boat, like regardless of what my orders were, I would kind of be reluctant given what would be possible consequence, like my whole boat blowing up fast. So I don't know.
I mean, that's the question on my mind with all of this, right? Is, well, maybe this is time to put Andrew on the spot of why are we doing this?
Well, you know, it's interesting because I ask people that. I ask our Latin America specialist at Tech that. I ask other experts, foreign policy, military experts that, and no one really seems to have a good answer. You know, clearly the initial rationale for this military escalation against Venezuela was totally pretextual. They talked about immigration and they talked about drugs, and it was clear that they were thinking about fentanyl when they were talking about all of the Americans who are dying from these drugs coming from Venezuela. The reason that's obviously pretextual on the immigration side is a regime change in Venezuela is going to worsen the problem. We've already closed the border. Trump has closed the border so that we don't have an issue of Venezuela's coming in. Maduro continues to cooperate, to my understanding, to this day with deportation flights from America to Venezuela, right? And I think I already mentioned if there's a regime change in Venezuela, we're going to have a regional immigration crisis that will probably affect the United States. And the fentanyl thing, I think everyone here knows is pretextual because fentanyl doesn't come from Venezuela. It comes from Mexico, synthesized with chemical precursors sourced from China. Some cocaine does transit through Venezuela, but most of that actually goes to Europe, not to the United States. The latest stuff that we've been hearing is a little bit more plausible, that this is like a passion project of Secretary of State Marco Rubio. And also there's apparently some interest in Venezuela's oil because they have huge oil reserves, more than the United States by a long shot. And then, you know, Trump, we can't pin this all on Rubio because Trump also had a pressure campaign against Maduro in his first term, right? And they, you know, John Bolton was part of that. They were hoping that Maduro's regime would collapse, which obviously didn't happen. So this is somewhat of a continuity from the first term.
Wait. Why can't we just pin that one on Bolton and this one on Rubio? In both cases, you had an influential advocate of the policy, and Trump is going, sure, I guess. Do I get to kill a few people? Great.
Yeah, that's true. I agree with that. I mean, ultimately, the buck stops with Trump because he appointed Bolton as his national security advisor, and he appointed Rubio, another hawk, as his national security advisor and secretary of state. But that's a good point.
Now, that leads to my own idea for how you undermine this. If, for example, you were at a magazine like the American Conservative and wanted to. But first, Connor, do you have anything to add to this whole thing on Venezuela?
Well, I'm just very curious about. I've been actually following this from a different perspective. I like to write about the Vatican, so I've been sort of thinking a lot about how the Vatican's dealing with this, which is kind of interesting in and of itself. But we can come back to that if we want. But the internal to the U.S. question that I'm curious about is what these conversations within the administration are looking like. Because I know, for example, that, you know, from people I've talked to, that Vance was sort of a voice for trying to wind things down during the Iran escalation. I think we could all have guessed that. I'm wondering what Vance is doing. I'm wondering where his team is in all of this. I'd like to think that he doesn't want to get us into another war. I guess he's sort of still the greatest restraint hope in the administration in terms of both like the relationship between his views and his actual level of influence. So that's a big X factor for me, is kind of where is Vance in all this.
I talked to a foreign diplomat recently, so this is all secondhand. Who told, Andy Baker is the main security advisor to Vance, and he's kind of shared with Rubio now. He's like a deputy national security advisor to Trump, so under Rubio. And what I've heard makes me think that he's kind of on board with this. So I agree with you. Vance has been a voice of restraint on Mideast issues, seemingly. I don't know how vigorously he pushed for restraint. The Signal Gate call, the resistance was quite tepid, from Vance that was, in that case, bombing Yemen. But there was some kind of restraint focus. I think that MAGA in general, and from what I hear sort of reliably, even from at least some people on Vance's team, are more on board with the Venezuela stuff. And there's this kind of idea that, well, this is in our neighborhood. We should focus on this more. It's not someplace, thousands of miles away, or like on the other side of the ocean, at least. So it matters more to our interests. That doesn't make sense to me, because if anything, that makes it worse, because we will be more likely, we'll be less insulated from the consequences of our stupidity in the case of Venezuela. But I think that even like pro-Vance people, MAGA people, are kind of going along with the Venezuela thing, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think Vance is a pragmatist, politically. I mean, like on the Signal Gate thing, you saw in the Signal chat, I do give him credit for initially voicing skepticism in that chat, but you saw how quickly he fell in line. Like, once it was clearly going to happen, he's like, great job, guys. I love this kind of stuff.
And he didn't actually identify the problem. He put it in the context of European freeloading. That's the word that they used, I think, freeloading, not free riding. That's not what the issue was. The issue was that this was in response to Israel, our client. The Houthis, when the Gaza war was going hot, the Houthis were firing at Israel. When the Gaza war stopped, the Houthis would stop. They were rational actors. And I think the case there was, I can't remember the details exactly, but either Israel had broken a ceasefire or was gearing up to do so, and the Houthis said, okay, we're going to be attacking the Red Sea again. And that's why we went back in. It wasn't to do with Europe's trade with China. But that's what Hegseth and Vance were complaining about.
Well, I think that points to the other distinction between Venezuela and Iran is Israel. There is emerging within MAGA something that I think has been latent for a while, which is a pretty fierce opposition on, coming from at least some people, to doing things on Israel's behalf that are not in America's interests. And that's certainly a distinction between Iran and Venezuela. But it is kind of odd because, there was a time when, like Iran was an exception to, for example, Steve Bannon's general, reluctance to intervene militarily, because Iran was like there were these Muslims, and it was somehow connected to Islamic radicalism or something. So there was that. But I think MAGA, including Bannon, is now more reluctant to do that kind of intervention, anti-Iran on behalf of Israel. But I will tell you something. A few months ago, I asked somebody by email who knows the landscape, like, why aren't we hearing more resistance within MAGA to the Venezuelan aggression? Like, where's Steve Bannon? And this guy said, a friend of mine tells me that Bannon is, quote, a Monroe Doctrine guy. So apparently within MAGA, there has been a little of this kind of sympathy, I guess, that, okay, we don't want to get involved in truly foreign wars, but in our neighborhood, we've got to be the bully. We're the big guy. I guess, I don't know.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. I think Bannon is critical of the Venezuela stuff.
Is he now?
I thought he was, but I should look it up. But, he's a big he doesn't like Rubio. Right. When I wrote a thing called Little Marco defends Greater Israel or something, Bannon was like sharing it on social media. So that makes me think he's a big anti-Rubio guy. I thought he was criticizing at least somewhat the Venezuela thing, but I agree with what you said. This idea of the Monroe Doctrine, I think there is this tendency to want to have what they call a muscular foreign policy, right? So a hawkish one, and somehow the rationale is such that it justifies hemispheric defense. I think even George Beebe of the Quincy Institute who is a guy I respect a lot. I'm sure he's not on board with all the stuff we're doing against Venezuela, but he pointed out in a recent roundup that you guys did at Quincy, Connor, looking at the national security strategy, and he said, well, maybe this Monroe Doctrine stuff doesn't sit so well with restraint types, but it's actually consistent with foreign policy restraint historically. He was making some point like that. To not want China here. China's not named in the NSS.
Yeah, but that's not what this is. There's nobody trying to get Venezuela except for us. I mean, it's not,
yeah, China kind of doesn't want anything to do. Like, they're kind of done investing in Venezuela because it's not a good investment,
Well, yeah, that's the thing is, I mean, again, if we're going to go to war with Venezuela, and it seems increasingly likely that can happen, setting aside even the international law implications of all the crazy stuff that we're doing in the Caribbean, all that type of stuff, like what is the threat to the United States that Venezuela poses? I would almost understand more if we were just doing like regime change in Cuba or something, right? It's right there. It's relatively close. Maybe if we're talking about just making sure that our hemisphere is protected and that is the logic, then like, why Venezuela?
Don't give them ideas, Connor. We're going to delete that.
Well, one reason that Rubio wants to go after Venezuela is because he thinks by toppling Venezuela, you also topple Cuba ultimately, which is a kind of weird rationale. Because why don't you just directly go to Cuba, as you said? I think the idea is one. I think it's this is a guy who thumbs his nose at the United States, who's
Well, yeah, but you know why? Because we keep doing shit like this. I mean,
no, I'm not defending it. I hate this policy. The American conservatives are super critical of what the Trump administration is doing vis-a-vis Venezuela. But I think the idea is every now and then you have to pick up a small country and throw it against the wall. And they're taking that mentality to Latin America because it's in our hemisphere and we got to be the big dog here. And Venezuela is the country that doesn't go along and do what we say and open up its resources to our private companies,
Yeah. I guess my theory of the case is basically, and this gets to, I mean, I'll cut to the chase. I think if there's a hope for undermining this policy, it's to, and you guys still put out a physical magazine, right, Andrew?
Every other month, yeah.
In olden times, we would have thought, like, if I was at the New Republic and you were trying to undermine the policy of a Democratic president, that you didn't like, New Republic was a kind of liberal magazine. You would ask, like, what could we do that would change the conversation on this, or that would get the attention of the president? I think what would get the attention of the president is like a cover of Time magazine or something, or any other, which comes out every week. So I don't know if you guys come out every 2 months. I'm thinking I may have to talk to the people at Time about doing this, but. Remember the cover that we think maybe had something to do with Steve Bannon having to ultimately leave the White House, I believe. Wasn't it a Time magazine cover that somehow depicted Trump as kind of the puppet of Bannon? I mean, I want to see a cover that says the deep state is back, and like Marco Rubio, Trump like a marionette, Marco Rubio, manipulating the puppet, and say, and then say something about Venezuela in the subhead. Because first of all, I think it's basically true. I mean, I think, Trump, there's something about it that appeals to Trump, but I think it's just this crude kind of like, wait, so I've said as a matter of ideology, I don't want to fight these wars in Europe and the Middle East and blah, 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 but I want to kick some ass. I want to get, I really think, I mean, Trump, it just appeals to Trump to be able to play a tough guy. But you can so readily make the case that the only not rational, but semi-coherent explanation is neocon motivation. I mean, remember the oil sanctions that are being, quote, enforced, although what's happening goes way beyond enforcing those sanctions. We don't have the right, even if you accept those sanctions, to prohibit Venezuela from sending oil anywhere in the world. But anyway, the rationale for those sanctions, which happened during the first Trump administration, was flat out neocon. It says on paper, we're doing this because they're undermining liberal democracy. He's an authoritarian, blah, blah, blah. It is standard neocon, ideologically justified regime change. And, I really think the talking point needs to get out there that Marco Rubio, the deep state is back. Trump is falling for it again. He thought he was over it. This was going to be different. It's not. He's doing the exact same thing, except in a different country. I mean, instead of, assassinating Soleimani, he's going to bomb Venezuela.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because the rhetoric of Rubio has changed a little bit over the course of this past year. Because early on in the administration, it looked like Trump was gearing up to do some sort of diplomatic engagement. The reason we have these deportation flights is because originally Rick Grenell, who was envoy at the time, was meeting with Maduro and doing some good diplomacy. He's I don't know if you could just say he's a dove in general. That's going too far, but on Venezuela, for some reason, he is. He thinks that there is possibility of cooperating there. Ultimately, Rubio won the presidency here on this issue, and then Stephen Miller, who is one of the top 5 most important people in the White House, has joined Rubio. So they're like a powerful team that's pushing for a hawkish policy on Venezuela. Susie Wiles is another powerful person. I think she doesn't really care. Vance, theoretically, is the restraint voice. And then right now, Miller and Rubio are influencing Trump. And Rubio's rhetoric has changed from like a democracy, spreading democracy thing to like Jacksonian, they're coming at us with these drugs and like it's killing Americans and we have to take them out. But it's clear that the actual motivation is neocon-y. I mean, even Rubio can't help himself, and he'll talk about how Iran has a foothold in Venezuela. This is kind of a neocon idea. And these little Havana types, this Cuban community in Florida, it's not just Rubio. They all are hawkish on Latin America and right now on Venezuela, and they talk in terms of spreading freedom to Venezuelans.
Yeah. No, I think the only way to wind things down at this point, and maybe too late, is to go for people, on not people like me and not people like Connor, but people who have credibility within MAGA to go hard on the Marco Rubio neocon deep state thing. Trump is falling for it again. Anyway, so we'll see what happens there. I mean, I don't think Trump is going to send in like ground troops. But I do think he may well wind up bombing the country of Venezuela. I mean, do you guys agree he's unlikely to launch a ground invasion? Oh, alarming silence. I'm starting to worry.
I honestly don't know. I didn't think that we were going to have this. I didn't think that any of this was going to happen. I didn't think that we were going to amass this many forces there. Well, the thing is, just thinking it through, there's only, if you're going to do this, if you're going to attempt to remove the Maduro regime in a way that leads to a stable government afterwards, potentially even, right, then the only thing that you absolutely can't do is just do airstrikes that are guaranteed to have something equivalent to Libya happen, where you're going to have a bunch of sort of insurgent groups fighting for power. If you think Maduro isn't going to be happy fighting the like Maria Corina Machado forces, then you're wrong, right? He's going to dig in, or some people like him are going to dig in. And so you've got that option, or you've got don't invade or don't do anything, which is great. I prefer that. Or you've got invade and try to do stabilization, quote unquote, operations and actually try to basically have boots on the ground and keep the country going. That's the only option that even, I don't think it would work, but that's the only one that could work if your goal is stability and, U.S. access to Venezuelan markets.
Yeah, my guess is there's not going to be, I mean, I don't want to say there's not going to be a war, because I think that what has already happened constitutes, acts of war, certainly this blockade. But I think that the idea, Susie Wiles in this Vanity Fair piece said the idea is that they're just going to keep squeezing Maduro until he says uncle, right? He's already offered to leave. He's been remarkably cooperative. But, I think he said he'll leave in like 3 years or something. It's like conspicuously when Trump will have just left. So maybe they didn't think it was credible. They think that they can put enough pressure on him where he will just kind of vacate the presidency. I'm told by our Latin America specialist, Joseph Addington, that Maduro's government, even though it doesn't have really a hold on the country, like Venezuela is a total mess, that it's basically coup-proof. They're not going to turn him in $50 million, his deputies. And if he leaves, there's like a line of succession. So, yeah, I don't really think that this is achievable, regime change.
Yeah, and I don't know why he would think he could ever be safe if he left anywhere. What, he's going to go to America? Yeah, I'm going to trust Donald Trump. no. I mean, where's he going to go? He wouldn't
Right.
feel safe in Venezuela after regime change. And where is he going to go where he thinks he wouldn't ultimately be susceptible to some sort of, international, law? I mean, this is the downside kind of the International Criminal Court, is making it harder to ease dictators out of power if that's your goal. But so let's let's move into your realm a little more, the Middle East, and let's do back up, zoom out a little, and talk about kind of looking back on the year. I mean, Trump has done a lot of stuff in the Middle East, and again, I mean, the recurring question in our conversation will be how much of this amounts to something coherent. I mean, is there a Trump foreign policy vision? I think, Venezuela is in a way the clearest challenge to the argument for coherence. But I've almost forgotten, like, where do we begin? Well, okay, so he came in with him saying he was going to get a truce in Gaza. Ultimately got a truce of sorts, although there's been a lot of killing since it started. I mean, a ceasefire. And I don't know. And then, bombed Iran. Take it away, Connor.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's been a profoundly mixed bag, as you're pointing to. I actually think, I'll start with the positive. And I think that this is downstream. I think so much of the weirdness of his policy is because he relies so much on these individual envoys, on these personal envoys that he has a relationship with. So you have Witkoff going around, and now even Kushner informally, but also Tom Barak, who is formally our ambassador to Turkey, but who acts as a sort of pseudo ambassador to Syria and to some extent to Lebanon. And I'm really happy with how the administration has approached Syria. I'm like over the moon, right? I could not be happier. I visited the country a couple months ago. They're really struggling under the sanctions are still having a very concrete effect. There's a lot of enthusiasm about recovery. There's a lot of enthusiasm about getting the economy going again. And really explicitly, because of the Trump administration's efforts, those sanctions are now going to be lifted in the annual defense policy bill. We're going to see genuine, deeper engagement. And we're seeing Trump has crushed the question of the president being a former jihadist, right? Because since he can sort of triangulate the politics, since he's the conservative, he's the Republican president, those are the people who would be mad about that. And he's just said, no, go away. I'm not mad. We're going to invite him to the White House and I'm going to spray perfume on him, right? And so I am really impressed with the approach there. And I think it's very directly a result of just like Tom Barrack's sort of proclivities and what he prefers. But then we've seen elsewhere, like you said, we've seen insane policy. We've seen what I worry about in terms of potential mission creep with taking over the mission in Gaza. Now we're going to have a 2-star American general at the head of this international stabilization force that they're talking about. That stabilization force is not a UN force. That's an American force. That leads
for now,
to
I mean, the UN resolution and Trump himself envisioned some sort of international force that may be very hard to assemble as a political matter in terms of finding...
I think this is why Israel's violating the ceasefire and killing like 30 people a week. It makes it more difficult to set up this international force in Gaza.
It is a deterrent.
It certainly makes people not want to send their forces, and that's the thing that we're seeing a lot. Is like you're saying, there's questions about the implementability. So I think that his approach to Gaza has been really bad, really bad. I don't think that I'm happier in any way with this than the Biden administration. I think that this is just a different kind of bad. The Iran stuff is such classic Trump, right? To do sort of an extraordinary show of force and then stop, right? So that's interesting. That's not terribly surprising, I guess, how he approached it. And maybe that's what we'll see in Venezuela. Maybe that's a clue for that. But yeah, I think it's a mixed bag because different people are winning out within the administration on different days. That's sort of what we're pointing to here, right? Is that you've got certain people, the Rick Grinnells of the world, the Tom Barracks of the world, who I really don't think want to see more war. Maybe Vance is in that camp to a certain extent. And then you got a lot of guys that want to have a muscular posture abroad.
Yeah. I do think Syria is actually what Trump foreign policy was supposed to be. It's realist. And it's in principle non-interventionist. I mean, he inherited these troops in Syria. I think Obama was the first person to put boots on the ground in Syria. And
Trump tried to withdraw them in this first term.
This is an old story with Trump trying to extricate troops from places and failing.
James Jeffrey, the appointee, Mike Pompeo appointee and special envoy to Syria, he's admitted that he slow-walked that withdrawal. I mean, you know, these service members just got killed in Syria.
Right. And now Trump is talking like he's going to get sucked back in, but you never know. I mean, it may be token retaliation, but he's saying, you know, we'll get our revenge. That's could lead to trouble. But yeah, the Gaza thing. I mean, you mentioned Biden, Connor. I mean, this week there was an eerily reminiscent thing where the Trump administration like leaks word that Trump said to Bibi that he was unhappy with him. That's a warning sign when that's the force of blowback, the form of blowback that Bibi gets is we leak that we're mad with him. Biden did that like once a day. I forget now. What did Bibi do this week that Trump had to show disapproval? I forget.
I think it was just generally violating the ceasefire.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, okay, good. Now, you know, but of course Trump could, you know, as you know, U.S. has a lot of leverage with Israel. There are political disincentives to actually use it, domestic American political disincentives. And I will say, look, Trump has gone in a way. He's gone farther with Israel probably than Biden did. You could say the initial ceasefire, I guess Bibi didn't want. Although, look, Israel is now occupying more than half of Gaza with troops. They are very much in control. Every attempt to do something they wouldn't like bringing international force in, they find a way to prevent from happening. So, you know, we're a long way from where we'd be if Trump used the leverage he actually has. But I guess I would say on his behalf, he's not worse than Biden, and maybe has been slightly better. I mean,
well, I think after the Doha strike, I think Trump was better than Biden ever was, because that seemed to genuinely piss off Trump and Witkoff. I mean, people have different ideas about how much the Trump administration had, you know, foreknowledge of Israel strikes on Iran and then on Doha. I'm not sure about the Iran case, but I'm pretty sure that they did not want Israel to strike Doha, and they learned about it at the last minute, and they tried to alert the Qataris. And then afterwards, they were genuinely really pissed off. And Axios reported that Trump, you know, there was this photograph where he made like Bibi Netanyahu Trump is holding the phone and Bibi is talking to someone in Qatar, right? And saying, sorry.
I think the emir or whatever,
he was saying sorry to their government. And also Axios reported that Trump, after that, threatened to walk away in terms of support for Israel. Like, you got to get a deal now. You got to help us clean up this whole diplomatic mess that's come out of this Qatar stuff. I got the sense that there was some genuine pressure after that episode. I don't think it has to do with Trump's feelings about the Gazans or something. It has to do with him genuinely wanting good, probably personal business relationships with the Gulf states for his, you know, people, including Witkoff. And also there is some sort of geostrategic calculation about the Arab world and the Gulf states.
Yeah,
I just wish.
Go ahead,
Bob.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, this is kind of, Bob, you're pointing to the idea of like Syria as a good case of the like ideal realism that we might be able to see from a Trump administration. And this is just a case where we haven't seen any, where maybe in that moment there was a certain amount of realism, but it's been followed by, you know, now we're going to be sort of an occupying force in Gaza, whether it's Americans or someone else. We're going to try to basically rebuild the strip and vet all Palestinians and stuff like that. I don't know. There's just these ways in which he's got these sort of a certain amount of realist inclination that in Israel just gets profoundly warped by his political calculus, I guess. That's the best guess I could make. But there is a version of this that could have been him doing a true strong arming and us having a situation that's more tenable than what we're seeing right now, because the situation in Gaza remains really bad.
Yeah, it does. And, you know, Andrew, you said, okay, he really did get tough after Israel bombed Qatar. Well, first of all, it was mind-blowing that Israel bombed Qatar and only gave him last-minute notice. And by the way, I would ask, why didn't they say don't do it when they gave him the notice? Why didn't they think a little faster? But if it was any kind of.
What I've read is that the Trump administration found out from their own forces in the region, like who detected.
Oh God! So they weren't going to give us a heads up at all. We've got a military base in Qatar.
There's mixed reporting on this, but I think it was something on that level. Yeah.
I mean, and so you say, well, Trump got pissed off, and we're told that he was pissed off, and look, even the fucking picture of Bibi apologizing. I say, put a fucking microphone in front of his face and say apologize. I mean, we do have that kind of leverage, okay? Americans have. They just don't think about the kinds of things you could, in principle, get Israel to do when Israel is as dependent on us as they are for so many things.
I don't agree. I don't think.
Well, let's get back to that. But the other thing I'd say is let's get back to the premise of whether we have leverage. I don't want to spin the whole thing on it, but if Trump was so pissed off, so he says, okay, Bibi, I'm pissed off. We're going to do this ceasefire in Gaza. And here's the terms. And the terms were terms that, like, they had to, in order to get Hamas to agree to something like this, all of their sponsors had to credibly threaten to cut off support. Okay. They didn't want to do it. So he had moved the ball pretty far. Trump had. And he says to Bibi, okay, here's the deal. And Bibi says, I don't like that. And he says, well, okay, what do you like? And Bibi says, well, I don't want to withdraw this far. I want the troops here and here and here. And Trump says, okay. He didn't have to say okay. And that's the reason that most of Gaza is still occupied by Israeli troops. As for the leverage, I'll just quickly say we provide their arms.
Why do we do that, though?
Oh, well, I'm just saying it's leverage right now. I'm just saying if you
but
imagine...
I don't think so. I think if you just look at the U.S. and Israel, it looks like we have a lot of leverage on them from like a realist framework. We like bankroll and equip their military, right? They couldn't be doing any of this. They wouldn't be able to attack Iran unless they knew we were going to extend our superpower shield over them. But then you have to ask, why do we do all of that stuff? And you have to get into the level of like politics. Like they actually have a lot of leverage over U.S. presidents and all elected officials. That's why whenever there's some investigation about violations of the Leahy law, well, they can get you. The Israel lobby is a profoundly powerful force in American politics.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying I'm distinguishing between what Trump finds politically feasible to do in the way of leverage and what is in principle doable. I mean, we could, I'm just saying we could get Israel to do things that we couldn't, get most countries to do. Of course, there's nothing comparable in so many senses. There's nothing comparable, but no, I don't disagree. Yeah, no, it is his perception of the domestic political cost, which is not inconsiderable, which makes the whole shift in conversation so interesting now.
Yeah, I agree.
Now you have so many voices in MAGA saying enough accommodating Israel. You've got on the left, a number of younger Jews who have very different views about Israel than their parents did. So the whole conversation shift is relevant, and I think it's maybe a reason that Trump went as far as he did. I'm not sure far is the word, but in exerting leverage. But I don't disagree that the political constraints are the issue.
Yeah, actually, go ahead.
Let me add one thing real quick. One interesting note on that. I had a piece a couple of days ago about this poll that showed that a plurality, in this poll at least, of Republican voters don't want to renew the $3.8 billion a year to Israel, which is coming up for expiration in 2028. So they're negotiating that right now. There's talk that Netanyahu wants to extend it for 20 years instead of 10, which is the standard 10 since the Clinton administration. And so, but what's interesting is I actually think that that's a political liability. And I think that the request that Netanyahu is making is a recognition of that liability, that there's on the right, this confluence of growing anti-Israel sentiment and then also growing skepticism about any foreign aid that is coalescing into a real predicament for Israel.
Absolutely. Yeah, Bob, when you told us by email that one of the things you wanted to discuss is, trends this year in foreign policy and global politics, this is what I thought about. I mean, this trend actually pre-exists not only this year, but even the Gaza war, this changing favorability ratings for Israel within the United States and indeed across the Western world. But the Gaza war has obviously accelerated it dramatically to the point where, Israel has basically lost the left Bibi during the Obama administration kind of put his bet on the Republican Party, right? And he got a lot of criticism for that because that was an unusual decision to make for an Israeli leader. So they've lost the left, and now they've lost young Republicans. So they've basically got like Republican boomers, or like their reliable cohort of support within the United States. And I think that creates long-term serious security problems for Israel, because they're like pissing off all of their Arab neighbors and scaring them, that they're trying to construct this greater Israel. And they're also heading toward a situation where they're going to lose the support of their Western patrons. And that seems very unstable to me. Like if you imagine things 20 years from now. And you're also seeing all of this pushback within the United States, like on TikTok. Like the reason TikTok became controversial is not China. It didn't get any traction, the ban TikTok campaign, until after the Gaza war started, and you started seeing this pro-Palestinian content go viral on TikTok, right? I mean, now, Barry Weiss is head of CBS. All of this stuff is part of this conversation. Like they feel like they lost narrative control,
Right.
And Bibi is aware of that, as Connor said.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, he doesn't always act like it.
Well, he's going fast because he knows this can't last forever. He's got.
I see what you mean. Yeah, and I think he may be righter than we think, in the sense that maybe if Gaza starts to fade, if Gaza starts to fade into the background, and it will in some sense, things may change. People forget, and things change, and you never know. But right now, he seems to, he's keeping it on kind of conspicuous simmer, I guess you could say. I mean, I hate to talk about like the killing, whatever it is, 30 people per week that way. But, so it's and yet, look, it is being forgotten in terms of mainstream media. I mean, how often do you see a reference to the people that he's killing in Gaza, or for that matter, the West Bank? I mean, Connor, you probably know more than I do about what is going on in the West Bank. But I think if you're Palestinian, it's not good. It gets almost no attention in mainstream media, right?
Yeah, it continues to be a nightmare. I mean, we even, just one random example from this past year that I don't think has been really reported, but there's one of my friends does like wine imports from the Middle East, and one of the wineries that he works with had a big part of their land seized by Israel, basically. And so now they were right near the border between the West Bank and Israel. And now they've lost a bunch of their vines, and that's not like an easy thing to put back in place. And this is the sort of thing that happens every day. You're seeing attacks on people, especially during the olive harvest season. We saw a lot of that. You're seeing sort of day in, day out videos on that we're seeing on X, because, the world is flat now or whatever. But we're seeing these things every day, and it's really unavoidable that the level of violence in the West Bank might even be similar to the level of violence in Gaza right now, just given that there's not an active war, because you're really seeing communities being terrorized. I don't know, that's kind of a side note, but it's not going away, and it points to sort of the ways in which there's been a real radicalization, I think, of Israeli society over the past couple of years that is going to be hard to put back, because there's just a lot of people who now view, if they didn't before, a lot of the people, especially in the settler movement, that view Palestinians as a demographic threat to be eliminated.
Oh, yeah. No, I think there's more sympathy for just flat out ethnic cleansing, which is what's going on by any objective description on the West Bank in this kind of incremental way. And, I mean, in Gaza, most of Gaza, Palestinians are no longer allowed to live in. I mean, by the way, it's interesting that they're talking about relocating selected Palestinians to beyond the yellow line where the Israeli troops are, which I guess is better than putting Israeli settlements there, which is also talked about. I don't know. But in any event, yeah, it's the whole thing clearly amounts to ethnic cleansing. And maybe one of the downsides of the use of the term genocide, or at least such prolific use, is it kind of distracts us from a term that probably more people it would be harder to argue about, it seems to me. I mean, you just can't, if you really pay attention to what's going on in the West Bank, like that's classic ethnic cleansing. You terrorize them, you make it hard to stay there, they leave. and you follow that up, or else you precede it with, the authorization of an Israeli settlement, whatever. So if we're going to cover this vast globe of ours, we should definitely talk about Russia and China. I don't know. Do people have thoughts?
This is, the issue of the Russia-Ukraine war is probably one where I will be more positive than you on Trump's handling of it. I have my own criticisms, and I've written a critical article about Trump's diplomacy vis-a-vis Russia-Ukraine. But I think that the strategy, the basic strategy, has been pretty good. I think that the Europeans sound like they're in la-la land, like they don't understand how bad things actually are for Ukraine in terms of like the war in the sky. Like Ukraine's air defense shield is totally cracking. They're being. I was in Ukraine. I was in Kiev a couple months ago during one of the biggest air attacks of the year, and I don't think a single ballistic missile was shot out of the sky. So it started with these Shahed and Garin drones, and then I was told after that, the ballistic missiles are going to come, and the mood there is much more grim than people realize. Their manpower shortage is acute. And I think that basically what Trump is doing, the criticism of Trump is that this 28-point peace plan, for example, is totally tilted toward Russia, and he's like pro-Russian or something. And my general perception, and I would be interested to hear what you guys think, is that is not true at all. That 28-point plan probably is something that Russia wouldn't have accepted. It was like a good basis for negotiations. I think there's some potential deal hypothetically that Russia would accept, and that one probably would have needed to become more concessive toward Russia.
Connor, do you have thoughts?
No, I agree largely with Andrew on this one. Actually, I know that there's a narrative. I think that we have a lot of instinct left over from Russiagate and all those things to think that everything that Trump does is because he's in the pocket of the Kremlin or whatever. Obviously, that's not any of our view on this call, but I really do think that he's struck an interesting balance. I mean, it's been done in this sort of informal and unusual way, right? You've had the big problem for a lot of this year was that they weren't getting into the details because he just kept sending, like Witkoff to meet with, Dmitriev, the Russian national security advisor equivalent, I think.
Yeah, I don't know.
Whatever position. Mm-hmm. But, and now Dmitriev is coming this week or in the next few days to Miami for meetings with Witkoff. And you're also getting a Ukrainian delegation. But anyway, since it's happened in these personal interactions between a relatively inexperienced, learning on the job real estate tycoon and these diplomats, it's been sort of stop and start. But I actually think I think that we could see a deal sooner than people think. I think that we're making real progress, and I'm hopeful.
That was my criticism of Trump's diplomacy, by the way. There's not a normal diplomatic process. It's not professional. I think part of it is Trump likes to have these big presidential level summits. Like that's what he's wanted. And Putin is not the kind of statesman who will want that. He wants the lower level people to work out the details. And it's really hard to get Ukrainians and Russians in a room. And then we don't really have like professional diplomats who are experts on the issue, who are highly engaged. But, with that big criticism notwithstanding, I think that the general process and strategy has been pretty good. I'd be curious to hear what you think, Bob. I think you think Trump's not putting enough pressure on Putin or something.
Well, I mean, I start with first of all, the agreement with you that Ukraine is in trouble. I mean, I've been saying this for years. Like in the long run, I don't see how you see this not getting worse for them. It's a significantly smaller country. They're going to run out of people first and so on. But my hope is that Russia will get like the worst deal possible, you might say, because I do put a lot of emphasis on international law. Russia's the one that violated international law by invading, even though, as you know, I think it was like American foreign policy malpractice that got us to the point where they did invade. I mean, still, Russia's the one that invaded. They're the one who broke the law. In my ideal world, as I've said before, Trump would have done like kind of exactly what he said he'd do before he was president, which is say to Ukraine, if you don't agree to this deal, I'm going to quit sending you weapons. Say to Russia, if you don't agree with this deal, I'm going to triple the number of weapons I send to Ukraine. Now, I don't mean do exactly that, but I do think he could have calibrated military support for Ukraine in a conditional, incremental way that would have had more of an impact on Russian thinking. I would have liked to see that. I'm actually curious, Andrew. You said that the air defense is almost beyond leaking. It almost doesn't work at all anymore in Ukraine. Does the U.S. have the capacity to change that?
No.
I mean, what if like more Patriot, like if they move Patriots from, well, Israel, for example, which might discourage Israel from routinely attacking every country in the area. But if they did that, would that help?
I think the issue here is the scarcity of interceptors. This is a very technologically expensive or sophisticated and expensive bit of weaponry. I've asked people this question. It's hard to get a good read on like how many interceptors do we have? How many do we need to keep ourselves? And like how many can we send to Ukraine? And how long is that going to keep them in the fight? I've been told by military experts that we could send them some more, but basically the scarcity issue is bad. Like what they need basically are air defense interceptors and drones, because now the Russian military has done a really good job of gaining the advantage in drones, which Ukraine initially had. And these are the things that we don't manufacture because of just the stupidity of our military industrial complex. Like we have a shortage of these things.
What about Silicon Valley? What about Palmer Luckey? What about these geniuses in Silicon Valley? I mean, seriously, this is kind of shocking to me.
I heard Anduril's drones are terrible.
Well, right. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm saying. These guys suck.
Yeah, it's a serious problem. Actually, the like European country that is best at making drones is Ukraine. So maybe we can learn from them, and then we can kind of scale up or something. Mm-hmm. We have like I think Palantir and stuff has been, we have given them a lot of support on like being more innovative on drones and producing them. But right now, I think what Ukraine needs, we can't provide. And the main thing that they need is manpower, because like I was in Kiev, as I mentioned, I talked to a lot of officials and former officials and national security types. And I was basically told like nobody wants to fight. Nobody who is not already fighting. And I met some men on the street and I tried to ask them in a way that didn't seem like awkward or abrasive, like, why aren't you fighting? And multiple men told me that they had health issues. It wasn't clear to me what those health issues were. I don't begrudge them this.
Like wanting to stay alive? That's a health issue.
Yeah, I'm not being critical. Like I was afraid being in this like nice hotel in Kiev. I can't imagine going to the front, I'd want to avoid that. So I can't remember what your question had been, but
here's actually a question. Before we should spend some time on China, but one question is, if in principle, if Silicon Valley did what you'd think they could do, which is make better drones than Russia makes, right? In theory, given the amount of technical talent there, given how much advance notice they've now had, the war's been going on a long time. Would drones, in principle, compensate for the manpower thing? I mean, it's too late to ask, kind of, but I'm curious because that's what they say, right? Is that the nature of the action on the front has really changed as a result of drones. It's like drones are what, when they work, make it hard for Russian troops to advance in the way that they used to advance. And that's why they have to send like 2 guys on a motorcycle to see how much damage they can do. Yeah. So I'm wondering, like, if Palmer Luckey weren't such a fuck up, no, that's too unkind, but it's just the posturing these guys do in Silicon Valley does get old after a while. If all of these geniuses in Silicon Valley could create a lot of half decent drones, would that change? Would that compensate significantly for the manpower issue?
Yeah, there's a lot in that question, right? I don't know if they could at all. I think that we've seen pretty consistently that they actually can't, because they need to create the whole thing with Silicon Valley and the whole thing with venture capital funding is that you need to create essentially a revolution with every company, right? It has to define an industry in a certain sense. And so you'd have to have one that was able to make this industry defining drone and make that be its only sort of thing that leads it through, and we just haven't seen them doing that. We haven't seen them, we've seen a bunch of companies trying different things. I went to like a big launch event that Shield AI did for what they described as like, but the things that they want to make are the things that are going to be expensive, right? These little piddling drones aren't going to bring in 20 billion a year. They're going to bring in small amounts. You need to make, like, Shield AI claims that they're making this autonomous fighter jet, right? Which is going to cost a lot of money still, right? It's not going to be cheap. So I just don't think that I don't think that the business model like works for this.
Mm-hmm. Actually, one more question, Andrew. Since you were in Ukraine, the casualty thing I've never been able to sort out. I heard somebody saying the other day that Ukraine's lost 1 million men and Russia only 100,000, which seems wrong to me. You also hear almost reverse ratios, right, from the other side. I just have no idea how many people have died on both sides over the course of the war, or what the current exchange rate, not, obviously in a not in the normal sense, but what is the ratio of casualties on right now? Do you have any insight into either of those?
Not really. I think the casualty exchange rate that you heard, the 10-1 one in favor of Russia, is not right. I think it's hundreds of thousands on both sides. And I'm not sure. And since it's a war of attrition, if they've lost equal numbers of men at an equal rate, that's terrible for Ukraine, But I don't think it's as favorable to Russia as the person you just referenced. And I think it's just, I think all that anybody knows is it's like hundreds of thousands on both sides.
Okay, so thoughts on China. So I guess what we can say about Trump is, with respect to Europe and Ukraine, he's doing what his ideology would seem to dictate. I mean, I find it more or less coherent. He wants to, withdraw at some rate support for NATO, and thinks Europe should be on its own, which I think it would be a good thing for Europe to assume more responsibility for its own defense and do so collectively. We're a little puzzled by how his ideology explains everything that's going on in the Western Hemisphere, and I guess in the middle of East, I don't know. We'd say we definitely see some signs of Trump ideology prevailing. Certainly in Syria, in some respects with Israel. I suppose you could say that, look, if you're going to bomb Iran in concert with Israel, you did it in a way that, our bombing didn't kill anybody. And that's maybe why we didn't get drawn in deeper. And then you stopped it there and told Israel stop there. I guess it could have been worse, whatever. China, I don't know. It seems like we've gotten some mixed signals. First of all, what would you guys expect from Trump? What should Trump ideology amount to with respect to China? And secondly, how do you think it's going?
I mean, I think Trump's ideology with respect to China, I think he has a great respect for powerful people, right? I think he likes the great power game. So I think that his personal thing would probably be, to the extent that he has an ideology at all, would probably be to make some sort of deal. If he could argue that he's done a grand bargain with China that is going to change the course of global politics, I think he'd be very excited about that opportunity. That's a thing in the history books, kind of. So I think that he's incentivized based on his personal proclivities for big things to go for something really big with China. But right now, I mean, this year has been sort of eating at the edges a lot, because you had the tariff, back and forth. I mean, like, think through the timeline of this year, right? He comes in, it's a little ambiguous at first, and then suddenly it's 100% tariff on China, and then that's gone because China's going to pull back these rare earth minerals, and then it goes up again, down again. We say that we're going to block the sale of these chips, and now we're not going to. We're actually going to encourage them, and we're going to take a kickback for the U.S. government on the sales of those chips or something like that. And then this morning he goes and the Department of Defense or whoever does these things announces an $11 billion sale of weapons to Taiwan. So you've got, I mean, it's ping pong, right? But I think that the long-term goal is genuinely to have, there's a real possibility of a leader level meeting between Trump and Xi again early next year. And I think I think that the goal for Trump will be to do more and more sort of grand bargain looking things. That would be my guess.
Was that 11 billion for Taiwan? Was that in this defense policy bill that you mentioned earlier?
That was an announced sale. That's not U.S. funded. That's they're buying them.
Because this bill has funding for Ukraine and Taiwan. Yeah, I think I share. I should follow U.S. China stuff more closely than I do, to be honest. But I share Connor's general impression. I think that this year was sort of a wake-up call for people in the Trump administration that China has a lot of leverage over the United States and it can push back hard when we push against them. I don't think that that's a bad place to be in with Trump in the White House, because I think he does kind of respect that. I was worried there was going to be like an intense rhetorical hostility toward China from the Trump administration, you know, at the time of the inauguration. I don't think we have seen that. I think it's been pretty muted, which is good. And Trump wants to get a deal. For him, that means you escalate big and then you kind of draw down later and then say, oh, we got a deal. And I think in the course of like escalating big, especially with this mineral rights thing and licensing agreements and stuff and threats from China, he realized, oh, I can't really do that. That's a bad idea. I know that a lot of people in the Trump orbit are and, you know, the foreign policy establishment in general are extremely worried about the possibility of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. And I think that they view that in a basically, like they view the solution to that as a basically hawkish one, like make Taiwan into a porcupine, you know, rather than try to lower temperature.
And wasn't that the idea in Ukraine before Russia invaded? And wasn't the perception in Russia that, look, if you're going to do this thing, you better do it now before Ukraine gets more porcupine-ish?
Yeah, I think that is what happened, and that's the threat here as well. I suspect that China doesn't. I suspect that the learning experience for China of watching the Ukraine war makes them less eager to invade Taiwan. But
I just wanted to add, it's interesting. Specifics of this arms package are very interesting because it's $11 billion, and it really is in line with the porcupine strategy in a very direct way. Because often they'll want like fighter jets or something, and fighter jets aren't going to help you that much. But this is HIMARS, which are, you know, we've seen used to great effect against advancing troops. They'd be very effective for stopping or complicating landing for Chinese soldiers in the event of a war. We're seeing Javelin, you know, shoulder launch type missiles. We're seeing all the things that you would need to make it really unpleasant to invade Taiwan, which is already unpleasant because of the topography of the place. It's a really hard place to actually land troops. So if they're able to move forward quickly with these sales, and if they're able to get this stuff to them, it is the right stuff going there.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to imagine Trump going to war over Taiwan. I don't think China is like poised to invade.
Trump has restored strategic ambiguity, which is good.
I guess, has he? I mean, wasn't Biden's policy, strictly speaking? Well, he kept claiming, yes, we would go to war, right?
Yeah, that was pretty bad for the policy.
A departure from strategic ambiguity. I don't think anyone took him. I don't know. Did anybody take him seriously? But yeah, I guess you could say that. I don't know. Within the administration, what's the lay of the land? Are there people who would not want to go to war for Taiwan and people who would?
It's a good question. I mean, you can just generally assume Rubio is hawkish, I guess. But like I said, I think this is just a whole different ball game than like Venezuela. Like a great power competition of this scale kind of focuses the mind. Some readings of I said earlier something I didn't mean. I said that the national security strategy doesn't mention China. I meant specifically in the context of Western hemispheric defense. They don't name China tactfully, you know, even though they're clearly thinking of China. But some people read that document as being surprisingly actually hawkish on China. Like, we want our Western hemisphere, but that doesn't mean we want to give China a sphere of influence, because we see a vital American interest in winning the security and economic competition in, they call it the Indo-Pacific and the NSS. So it seems like people in the administration have this idea, this kind of Elbridge Colby idea, that there's still a chance to like contain China and to like compete with it in its own sphere.
What do they think containment means? I mean, what are they afraid that China will do? It seems to me that most of when China has thrown around its weight, including in kind of alarming ways, when it starts getting physical with boats that belong to, I don't know, the Philippines or whoever, physical in some sense or another, but in a disturbing sense, it seems to me that pretty much all of this you could, in principle, explain in defensive terms. And in fact, I had, Dmitry, is it Alperovitz or,
right.
He wrote this China Hawk book, and I had him on, and I said, it's interesting. In the book, you say that if you look at China, the trade situation, the trade routes it wants to keep open, even like the depth of water in these various places, that it has a somewhat expansive conception of what it needs to keep control over for defensive purposes, in the sense of knowing that, yes, it can do the trade it wants to do and blah, blah, blah. And I said, isn't it the case that everything that is interpreted, as belligerence by China could be explained in those terms? And he said, yeah, could be. I mean, and he's a hawk. So my question is, I guess, in the administration, I mean, you had, like, during Trump 1, is Peter Navarro still there? You had these crazy level China hawks like Peter Navarro, but the people like Elbridge Colby, what do they think containment would keep China from doing that it wants to do, that would be flagrantly at odds with our interests, or even the interests of Japan and South Korea, and like civilization in that part of the world?
I mean, I think the core Bridge Colby thing is, I don't think that Bridge Colby wants to go to war. I think that Bridge Colby believes that we will achieve deterrence by staying there, and that it will allow us to ensure free trade in the region and access of the U.S. to Asian markets, basically, right? I think it's a kind of natural extension of that. It's a really challenging. I mean, what do you? There's not an easy answer. And again, I don't think that there's like a unified thing within the administration on any of this either. I think that there is a lot of division. I think Colby, of anyone, is probably the one driving a lot of the China policy right now. But I don't know if he would have been excited about this chip change or not. I don't know if he's usually as deeply engaged on those things. I mean, it's just not. The funny thing is, we're like a decade and change into the pivot to Asia, and no one has like figured out what it means to pivot to Asia, right? We're going to war in Venezuela. We're still have troops in the ground in the Middle East. We're everywhere except for Asia. And so I almost think it's sort of a thing that is just not being focused on at the high levels of the administration day in and day out.
Andrew, do you have?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, I think I broadly agree with you. Like, I think that China is thinking in defensive terms. I think it'll be kind of a natural tendency of a rising power of its size to have an overly expansionist conception of what its defense requires. And I think a kind of civilizational framework is necessary to understand China. Like, they want Taiwan back because Taiwanese are Han Chinese, and they see this as like an unresolved aspect of their civil war, and they want to get it back. It's a renegade province. And, I basically see China as being like radically ethno-nationalist in their ideology. And that has some downsides. That could be a belligerent ideology, but it's also kind of reassuring. Biden wanted to turn the whole world liberal. I don't think Xi Jinping wants to turn the whole world Han Chinese, So I don't think that they're wanting to get Taiwan back is evidence of like they're going to break through that chain and then they're going to like try to conquer the whole region or something. But I think there's a kind of realism in Colby and realism like in a Mearsheimer sense where they don't want to let China establish regional hegemony. They want to create dilemmas and difficulties for China in its own region, because if it did get a foothold there and become a regional hegemon, it could cause kind of unforeseen potential problems for us that are maybe hard to predict in the outset, but just it'll be a new world where there will be a country with as much global influence as we have had for the past century or whatever, few decades.
Well, that's the concern, I think, specifically, is that China will do what we did, right? Is that China, that's sort of the argument that these people have, is that the US became convinced that it was necessary to essentially have a primary position across the world in order to guarantee continued growth, in order to guarantee our economic interests. You know, Stephen Wertheim's book, Tomorrow the World, talks about that. That was a kind of famous book a few years ago. And China could make a similar set of decisions. They haven't, I don't think, right? I think there isn't any evidence that they've made that sort of decision. But that's the strategic problem. Another book that's relevant to this, I forget the name of it, but it's by a political scientist named Dale Copeland, and he just talks about, like, when you're thinking through from an American strategy point of view, China, you have to think, okay, we know what they are now, but what are they going to be in the future? And I think that a lot of the hawkishness stems from suppositions about what they'll be in the future, which is to say that they'll have more expansive interests that they will see as defensive in the same way that we do today and have in the past 100 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm out of China thoughts. Do you guys have any closing, like, global thoughts of any kind? Year in review thoughts? I mean, there's one China thought I'll have, which is just, as far as the tariffs, I mean, it just points to the problem with Trump. Like, there is a version of tariffs that would be the coherent expression of Trump's worldview. And one can argue that there are kinds of industrial policies that make sense that involve tariffs. It's just so chaotic. I mean, there's just, and that's one thing that I think of about China and other countries, in this context of kind of reviewing the year in Trump. But do you guys have any other global year in review thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing more. One global thing that's been funny is the world learning to speak Trump. I think in the first term, most people resisted it, but now you're seeing, these, when Mark Rutte, like the head of NATO, comes to DC, he's talking about how great Trump is, and he's complimenting him and saying how strong he is of a leader and all these things. And you're seeing also just the sort of out and out corruption from people in the Gulf, from these other places. I think the world is really settled into the idea that there's something lasting about Trumpism in the US, and that, like, the way to deal with America now is to deal with Trump like he's a real estate, tycoon, because of course he is. And so that's been an interesting shift, because you're just not, the Europeans have given up on the whole, like, holier than thou thing, I think.
Yeah, maybe my kind of global last thoughts also pertain to Europe, and just because you made me think, like, I think that Rutte and these European leaders, they shouldn't do that. I think it's a bad way to get influence over Trump. They're just hoping to ride this out, get through the Trump years, because it's, like, very destabilizing and unpredictable for them. And it's been interesting to me in recent weeks. I've been doing some reporting on these parties that are, you guys probably would call far right parties in Europe, like the Alternative for Deutschland party, some Polish.
I would. I want to record now that I consider them far right. Yes.
Yeah, I like those kinds of parties generally, and I've been talking to people in them, political advisors and politicians and stuff. And what's interesting to me is, like, they welcome Trump, the advances in this national security strategies, comments against, criticisms of the European Union and of mass migration, but they're interestingly not willing to just, like, let their country's future be dictated by Trump. Like, I get the sense that they would actually have some more backbone than these EU leaders. And one thing that I've been watching that I think has been really interesting this year is how the Trump administration, it wants retrenchment from Europe. It's annoyed at the European Union. It has a different conception than most of the foreign policy establishment does about America's alliance structure as it pertains to other Western countries. But they also have developed this kind of civilizational view of the West and of America's cultural and historical connection to Europe, which I think was very unexpected. And I'm not sure where it's going or if they can actually translate that into policy, but it's something that has become, like, a consistent theme of this administration.
Okay. Well, without further interventions from either of you, I guess we'll wrap it up. Let me say one thing we didn't do this time is bring the paywall down, which we usually do. This is a kind of in the spirit of the holidays. We're just giving this whole darn thing away for free. But I would say if anybody in the spirit of the holidays wants to rate and review us, I would encourage that. And I would want to go beyond just uttering the phrase, like actually think about doing it. I don't do this very often. I don't make this appeal very often, but I don't. Right?
Yeah.
You're laughing at me or with me? What do you? Whoa,
kind of both.
Andrew. What?
I
What
just
is
like
it?
watching you do these advertising marketing pitches. There's something entertaining about your approach.
At or with?
It's a
With.
mix. It's kind of in between.
Andrew,
Thank
it's
you,
such an
Connor.
easy answer.
God bless you, Connor. Connor's such a good young man. So now it's hard to proceed. You got me self-conscious, Andrew, but I will persist. I will. So these are, you're making it hard though to do it with a straight face, but it's true. These are challenging times in little guy media, as we refer to this particular niche. Like Barry Weiss, okay? They're giving her like jillions of dollars to damage the world, if I might, at the risk of oversimplifying the implications of her worldview. She gets all this money to advocate policies that I think are a terrible idea. And beyond that, just the whole media landscape is getting super challenging. There's like a zillion newsletters, a zillion podcasts. So if you do support what we're doing here, I really would ask you to, you can go to Apple Podcasts, the podcast app of your choice, rate and review. You can also become a paid subscriber if you're not one already. And that will give you access to a lot of things, including the overtime segments that are part of almost every podcast. So anyway, how did I do, Andrew? You still laughing at me?
That was good. No, I wasn't being mean. And I second your thoughts. I love Nonzero. I still read it, even now that I don't work there, and I appreciate it. Often when I tell people that I used to work for you, like, everyone knows who you are. I think you're having an influence.
Where are these people who know who I am? Why don't I ever run into them? Send them my way.
Somehow your ideas about non-zero-sum games have insinuated themselves into the like collective unconscious and consciousness of people in DC. Like I often encounter people who are aware of those ideas, which is good. So yeah, people should subscribe to the Nonzero newsletter, watch the Nonzero podcast. I still do.
Connor, try to top that with your annual tribute to Bob.
Well, that's right. Well, when I think of, my greatest inspirations.
I'm kidding.
When I think of the people that have made the greatest impact in the world, it's Bob, Gandhi, and I don't know, who's number 3?
I'd probably put Gandhi ahead of Bob, but I agree with you. Yeah.
Okay. But if we want Gandhi to be successful, the modern Gandhi, Bob, it really does matter.
You got to rate and review Gandhi.
Do reviews. Yeah. Think of it like you're doing Gandhi. Even write it as if Bob is Gandhi. And just go from that assumption. And then people will assume that this is even bigger. And that kind of gets the ball rolling. So no, I mean, it's a great product. It's a great product. If you're not a subscriber to Nonzero, you should be.
Thank you. You have both now done what I brought you here for. And everybody should definitely read you guys. Andrew Day at the American Conservative, Connor Echols at Responsible Statecraft. They're also on Twitter. Andrew's been tweeting up a storm. I don't know. You've had some good tweets. Are you using AI for tweets, Andrew?
No, I've actually developed like a spiritual aversion to artificial intelligence, and I never use it for any reason whatsoever. I think I listened to too many of this, like Joe Allen, the Bannon's AI guy.
Oh yeah, I had him on.
Oh, cool. I should listen to that. Yeah, I'm anti AI
like
now.
I predict that policy won't last a year, but we'll see. We'll check in next year and see if Bob's predictions hold. All right. Well, thanks you guys, and we will see you down the road.
See you guys.
Thank you.